All right, folks. Instant karma and Uno reverse. The Washington Post, democracy dies in darkness, gave out a hard-hitting article. And never once would the Washington Post post false or fake information. Never once would the Washington Post get anything wrong. Never once would this great bastion of news and journalism and credibility would ever smear two award-winning journalists who've been speaking truth to power. But oh, wait! The Washington Post, democracy dies in darkness, smeared Aaron Mate and Max Blumenthal and the crew of the Gray Zone. Now, the Gray Zone, Aaron Mate, Max Blumenthal, and their whole crew have done some pretty phenomenal work. We have all seen their work, and listen, they've been on point. They have been on point. But apparently, the Washington Post and a person named Joseph however to say his last name, decided on June 2nd, 2024, to smear the good work of the Gray Zone. So I want to pull this article up here. This is archived, though. News site editors' ties to Iran, Russia show misinformation's complexity. There you go. So let's talk. What's going on here? Recently, unearthed documents reveal that leaders of an online news site aimed at Americans have received money from both Russian and Iranian media outlets, showing how widespread geopolitical alliances are making it harder to identify and trace foreign influence operations. All right. Now, when you make a statement like that, do you have proof? Credibility. Oh, do you? Do you have that? The answer is most likely a no, because listen. Just on a personal note, I remember in Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love in 2016, how in one day there were 16 negative articles about Bernie Sanders done by the Washington Post. Washington Post, democracy dies in darkness. Hacked emails and other documents from Iranian government-funded press TV show payments of thousands of dollars to a writer who is now a Washington-based editor for Gray Zone, whose founder regularly appears on Russian television and once accepted a trip to Moscow for a celebration of a Russian state-controlled video network, RT, that featured Vladimir Putin. Boogie. Misinformation experts, because they're smart, they got big brains, say the overlap in funding underscores concern that the spread of falsehoods and propaganda online is now entering a more complex stage as the November election draws closer because, oh no! Donald Trump. That's how these liberals act. Oh no, there's a news source that's more credible than the Washington Post. We got quickly smear it, slander it. What you are reporting is, I think, the most practical example of that coverage we've seen, where you have someone who has deep ties to Iranian state media working for an organization that we know is a destination for narrative laundering from Russia, said Emerson Brooking, co-director of the Atlantic Council Digital Forensics Research Lab. The press TV files, much of them in Persian, were released on Telegram in 2022 by a self-proclaimed hacktivist group called Black Reward. Okay, but the files received little attention then. An activist, a disinformation researcher, Neil Rohiser, converted them into a searchable format and provided them to the Washington Post. Oh my goodness. The files appear to show that Iranian broadcaster paid Washington-based reporter for occasional contributions to its programming in 2020 to 2021 while he was working as a correspondent for Russia's Sputnik news outlet. That reporter, Wyatt Reed, had 9 bylines in the online publication Gray Zone 2019 to 2020, followed by a gap of 2.5 years. He has had 24 more Gray Zone bylines since mid-2023 when he was identified as managing editor. Gray Zone posts content on the web, X, YouTube, and has been highly critical of Iran's regional enemy, Israel, and its supporters in the United States. Reed did not respond to repeated requests for comment. Gray Zone top editor Max Blumenthal did not answer emails seeking comment. First Amendment guarantees the First Amendment. Oh, this is a problem for most liberals. The First Amendment guarantees free speech rights, even for Americans believed to be spreading foreign propaganda. But current and former intelligence officials also say that America's tolerance for information paid by foreign actors has made disinformation one of the most critical threats to U.S. democracy. Because never once would corporate media lie to us. Hey, folks, let's have democracy in the chat. Do you trust our current media system? Type 1 for yes, Kit, I do. Yes, Kit, I do. And shame on you. Shame on you Shame on you for saying such mean things. We got to trust the press because the press would never lie to us. Type 2, man, I don't trust the media. I have to read the news to figure out how they're lying to me this time. That's what we got to do now. So the ball is in the people's court. Ball's in your court, folks. Balls bounce around the building. Boom! Foreign support for obscenely independent publications gives other countries deniability for disinformation as well as protection from internet platforms, labeling output as coming from state-sponsored outlets. Reed is not the only Gray Zone author to have worked for Russian outlets. Gray Zone contributor and London journalist Mohammed Elzami wrote full-time for Sputnik between 2019 and 2020. He says on his LinkedIn profile, regular Gray Zone freelancer Jeremy Lofredo was full-time at RT in the same years, according to his LinkedIn. Neither responded questions for comment. The payments to Reed, documented in the hacked Press TV documents, came before last year when the Iranian outlet was singled out for U.S. sanctions that went beyond the general ban on imports from and exports to Iran. That was set by presidential executive order in 1995, but Press TV's parent, state-owned Islamic Republic of Iran Broadcasting, was specially sanctioned in 2013, which attorneys said automatically barred transactions with subsidiaries without special permission. Attorneys who deal regularly with Iran sanctions issues said U.S. journalists who were paid by sanctioned Iranian media entities could be in legal jeopardy. Unless they were guaranteed waivers by the U.S. Treasury Department. The United States has granted some limited exceptions for state media employees sent to cover events in the country. If you're exporting your services to an Iranian company, the answer is yes. Sanctions attorney Ali Hershey said in a response to a question about potential liability. Every Iranian entity is sanctioned, and if there are specific sanctions, you definitely need a license. Working for Sputnik theoretically might be covered by Foreign Agent Registration Act, which generally requires anyone working as the agent of a foreign principal to register with the Justice Department if they intend to influence officials or the American public regarding U.S. domestic or foreign policy or the political or public interests of a foreign government or foreign political party. You know what this means, breaking it down? This article by the Washington Post is giving a green light signal to the establishment. Hey, let's start arresting more journalists. Hey, let's go after the Gray Zone. Hey, let's go after Aaron Mate. Hey, let's go after Max Blumenthal. Hey, let's go after everybody that's part or associated with the Gray Zone. That's what they want to do because this election cycle, because of Russia, and because of Trump. That's what's happening. When I said on this show, especially early on in this year, that the censorship was going to get worse, that people were going to be slandered and smeared, I didn't expect it to come like this, but here we are. Here we are. Here we are. Now listen to this very carefully. While there is no evidence that Iran and Russia discussed their payments to Reed or others, the combination makes it harder to say which country is pushing for or rewarding any particular narrative. Russia has in the past paid freelancers who did not know where their salary was coming from. It is increasingly common for social media influencers to boost government-backed themes and content, as well as being boosted themselves for doing so. You don't say. It's almost like that's the same thing here in the USA. After all, look at Harry and his fantastic friends as they go to bat for Biden. But we know who's paying them. It's the DNC. The Australian Strategic Policy Institute said recently that Russia and China probably had coordinated ahead of the March election in the Solomon Islands to spread misinformation in their official social accounts about non-existent U.S. plot for regime change. And in 2021, Russia and Chinese officials agreed to cooperate on a slew of media ventures, according to emails hacked from a Russian broadcaster in 2022. The initiative was led by Russia's Ministry of Digital Development, Communication, and Mass Media and China's National Radio and Television Administration. Since then, China's channels have quoted Russian officials and have often adopted Russia's view of the Ukraine war. Chinese accounts even amplified false claims about U.S. bioweapons research in Ukraine, which helped China point to a possible American origins for COVID-19. Now, hold on. Here we go. The Gray Zone, which again is saying, does not disclose its financial backing. Little known among most segments of the population, it has hundreds of thousands of followers on both YouTube and X, and that's problematic to the Washington Post. And stories sometimes ricochet among both the far left and the far right. Ex-owner Elon Musk has helped that. Corresponding on his platform last year was Gray Zone personality Aaron Mate when Mate accused the investigative website Bellingcat of being a NATO front and said that the White House has talked to negotiated settlement in Ukraine. Gray Zone founder and editor Max Blumenthal appears on RT and attended the same 2015 Moscow Gala dinner for that for it that Michael Flynn famously joined. And look, hey, there's Jill Stein there too, because they got to bring in Putin and Russia and all this other stuff. So what can we take away from this? Well, first of all, give it up for the buzzsaw. The Washington Post has retracted the central claim of Joseph Men's hit piece against the Gray Zone. In his sleazy article, because here's Aaron Mate, the buzzsaw coming at us. In his sleazy article and the tweet below promoting it, Men falsely claimed that Gray Zone's top leaders have taken money from Iran as well as Russia, showing how it is getting harder to trace the forces behind any one false narrative. In real life, the Gray Zone editor, Wyatt Reed, once did freelance journalism for Iran's Press TV, work that he did openly and before he worked at the Gray Zone. Man who works at the Post disinformation reporter spun it into a now retracted lie that the Gray Zone's top leaders are funded by Russia and Iran. The Post correction added to the top of the article admits that Men's claim is false. This, of course, after his false narrative spread widely, and he still hasn't deleted or corrected his false tweet. Yet another case where establishment voices who accuse independent journalists of spreading misinformation are in fact the ones doing so. So look, correction from that fucking article that I just read. A previous version of this article incorrectly said the leaders of the online news site Gray Zone had received payments from Iranian media, according to recently unearthed documents. The documents show that only one of the site's editors received such payments. The article has been corrected. And look, here's Joseph. Joseph, say it again. I wrote about a news site whose top leaders have taken money from Iran as well as Russia, showing how it is getting harder to trace the forces behind any one false narrative. So when you see people like this, just remember, Joseph covering hacking, disinformation at the Washington Post. Does it come as a surprise to you that people no longer trust the news? But it's okay. Now, all that happened on June 2nd. Do you want to see something funny? Are you ready to laugh? I love karma. Truly, I do. I can't sugarcoat it anymore. Will Lewis bluntly defends Washington Post shakeup. What's going on? When the Washington Post publisher Will Lewis and new interim executive editor Matt Murray met with staff Monday, the newsroom was still coming to terms with an abrupt exit at Sally Busby, who had led the paper since May 2021. Everyone was pretty shocked with your email last night, one reporter said at the meeting, according to a source present. The reporter suggests that the most cynical interpretation sort of feels like you choose two of your buddies to come in and help run the Post, and now we have 4 white men running 3 newsrooms. They expressed surprise at this development given Lewis' prior communications to diversity. Oh, no, but what's going on? Well, it's because, hey, the Washington Post is on the brink of extinction. Murray, who previously led the Wall Street Journal, replaced Busby as executive editor through the presidential election, at which point Robert Winnett, a veteran of the UK's Telegraph Media Group, will take on a new role of editor. Murray will move over to a new division of the paper that Lewis referred to as the third newsroom, Opinions being the second, which will focus on service and social media journalism and run separately from the core news operation. Lewis explained to staff that the news began to leak out, which is why we had the scramble last night. Indeed, I've learned that the New York Times was chasing a story on Busby's potential resignation, and the Post didn't want to get it scooped. Hence, the 8:40 p.m. staff memo from Lewis announcing that Busby would be stepping down. Senior editors close to Busby didn't know this news was coming, according to 2 sources familiar with the situation. We found out on Sunday evening in an email. That's not how well-functioning companies announce major personal news, one staffer told me. What the effing F? That's how I feel right now. During the Monday meeting, Lewis said, "We need world-class journalism every single day." Oh. Ha! Hey, guys, we need world-class journalism every single day, all the time, every time. That's what they need. Excuse me, sneezing on air, one of my biggest fears. I hate doing that. We need world-class journalism every single day, and the people that are coming in to help us to do that will be a real benefit to the organization. He said he really enjoyed working with Sally and wished it could have gone on for longer, but it couldn't. As far as diversity goes, Lewis admitted it's not great and vowed to do better going forward. Later in the meeting, another reporter asked Lewis whether any women or people of color were interviewed and seriously considered for either of these positions, a question that prompted applause. Lewis said there will be significant opportunities within a new organizational structure. Asked by another staffer about which people he met with, Lewis said it was a relative messy process, which I don't want to go into the details of. At one point, Lewis was asked whether he was intentionally bringing in people who come from different culture than the Post. We are losing large amounts of money. Your audience has halved in recent years. Oh, people are not reading your stuff. Ouch. Oh, that's gotta hurt. We are losing large amounts of money. Your audience has halved in recent years. People are not reading your stuff. I can't sugarcoat it anymore. So I've had to take a decisive, urgent action to set us on a different path, sourcing talent that I've worked with that are the best of the best. You know what this means? That everybody working at the Washington Post sucked. No one's reading the... Hey, folks, let's have democracy in chat. Are you reading articles from the Washington Post for the hard-hitting journalism? Type 1 for yes, kid, I am. Okay? They post good stuff, the Washington Post. Type 2, man, hell no. He continued to take a blunt approach when asked about the third newsroom, specifically how it would be staffed. I'll be looking for people to put their hands up internally, but also sourcing talent externally, said Lewis of the third newsroom. Lewis said in Sunday's memo, the aim is to give the millions of Americans who feel traditional news is not for them, but still want to be kept informed, compelling, exciting, accurate news where they are and in the style that they want. Don't we need our brilliant social journalists and service journalists as embedded in our core product to make sure that people are actually reading the thing that's at our center of mission for the Washington Post? One staffer asked, to which Lewis replied, you haven't done it. I've listened to the platitudes. Honestly, it's just not happening. Oh my God. Listen, on the off chance they see this, Aaron Mate, Max Blumenthal, treat yourselves to the steak dinner. The Washington Post is imploding, and all those people that slandered you and smeared you guys. Why do I have a feeling that some people are going to get fired? And, let's face it, Jeff Bezos, remember him? The dime store version of Lex Luthor, that guy. He's Amazon, his little creation. Washington Post, his little obedient servant. If you don't think that guy's not involved in any kind of decision-making process, because at the end of the day, he has to make that money, right? He's looking at the Washington Post. These people are pissing out articles that nobody's reading. Sort of like what happened to Vice and BuzzFeed and Vox. Remember them? Again, I just want to read that one more time. You haven't done it. I've listened to the platitudes. Honestly, it's just not happening. So we're just going to give up on... No! I want you to be inspired. It's the most important thing. Untapped audiences. If what I cause to happen is you all get it, great. But the game is up. I'm setting up a structure where I'm not going to be guessing. It had to look like business as usual in the days leading up to Sunday's shakeup. Busby, along with managing editor Meta Gold, attended a White House News Photographer Association gala on Saturday night. Ooh la la. Busby had been in the hub running coverage when Donald Trump was convicted Thursday on 34 felony counts, and there had been no signal of a coming change at the top during the town hall week earlier when Lewis, joined by Busby on stage, mapped out his vision of resuscitating the Post business. A Post spokesperson declined to comment. That being said, the general consensus inside the Post was that Busby was not long for the top job. Lewis, the former Dow Jones chief executive and Journal's publisher, had been bringing his own people into parts of the company since he was named CEO and publisher last year, including hiring Carl Wells, a chief growth officer in January. Sorry for that stutter. Susie Watford, a chief strategy editor in April. The staff sensed it was only a matter of time before he did the same in the newsroom. Both Wells and Watford worked at Dow Jones, as did Murray, whom Lewis appointed to lead the journal back in 2018. You know what this tells you? That all that social justice and all that other identity politics in the Washington Post, people got tired of being lectured to. People got tired of the Trump derangement syndrome. People got tired of all this fake praise for Democratic leaders. Because that's what the Washington Post was doing. And not to mention that article that smeared Aaron Monte and Max Blumenthal. Well, gee, maybe there's another reason why people aren't tuning in, because people are looking at real news sources like the Gray Zone, where they actually are informed about foreign policy and our corrupt two-party system. Gee, what a controversial statement, you know? But it's funny when you really think about it. It's really funny because these Washington Post journalists, these people who are so upset by the shakeup, they're like, oh no, our free ride, our free lunch is over. Who cares? This is what's funny. Busby never seemed to fully find her groove. Oh, get your groove, baby girl, at the Post. Despite journalistic achievements like the paper nabbing the Pulitzer last month for national reporting, she succeeded legendary editor Marty Baron, already a tall order, made even more by challenging the fact that most employees weren't even in the newsroom when she started due to the COVID pandemic. When I profiled Busby a year into the job, it was evident that staffers were still trying to get a handle on the paper's leader. She had spent her entire career at the Associated Press and brought in more low-key style to a high-profile job. It's a place that is perhaps unusually attached to taking direction from the very top, one Post reporter said at the time. So to not have that, I think is very unsettling for a lot of people. So in other words, she wasn't really much of a leader. If she was low profile and didn't really make much of a statement, nobody knew what was going on. Then came in the reported tension between her and then publisher Fred Ryan, economic windfalls and major cost-cutting measures, including buyouts for more than 200 employees across the Post staff. After Ryan's departure, a third staffer said there wasn't a lot of energy left. Hence why you're getting piss-poor articles with the Washington Post. With Lewis' appointment, I think it was understood that Sally was kind of a dead woman walking, a second staffer said. But given that Lewis did not make an immediate change to Busby's role when he began in January, the expectation was that he would wait until the presidential election. Instead, he made the move 5 months before Election Day amid a historic news cycle. According to the New York Times, Busby told colleagues on Sunday Night Call that Lewis was pushing for aggressive changes at the paper, and she would have preferred to stay to help us get through this period, but it just got to the point where it wasn't possible, because I'm willing to bet she had to sit down with the new guys, and she couldn't explain her actions. She couldn't explain why the audience was leaving. She couldn't explain why no one was reading the Washington Post, and she couldn't explain why everybody was just making fun of the Washington Post. Because what has the Washington Post done to really inspire you or anybody in general? The Washington Post, like all of corporate media, has its narrative. And the thing is, people are wising up to that narrative. You, my audience, are wising up to that narrative. You see firsthand how inept and brain dead so many articles are. Look, already, Washington Post. I want to pull up this article again right here. Washington Post. News site editors' ties to Iran and Russia show misinformation complexity. There you go, right? And look. Here's Joseph Menn saying how the top leaders from the Gray Zone, goodness gracious, are taking that money. But what's this right here? Correction, Gray Zone. Turns out you're not doing, you're not fact checking. You're not looking at your sources. A previous version of the article incorrectly said that leaders of the online news site Gray Zone had received payments from Iranian media, according to recently unearthed documents. The documents show that only one of the site's editors received such payments. The article has been corrected. I want to give a huge shout out to Kit Clarenberg. There we go. Another Kit. Absolutely perfect. Days after Washington Post hideously slanders the Gray Zone and its independent, non-foreign finance contributors, Vanity Fair reveals Washington Post on the brink of extinction. Its own publisher admits that no one reads this shite anymore. And look, shout out again to Glenn Greenwald. We're losing large amounts of money. People are not reading your stuff. I can't sugarcoat it anymore. Washington Post publisher telling an angry horde of Post journalists why it's necessary to make major changes, including firing the executive editor. This is absolutely pure gold. And it's funny. It's the death of legacy media. It's the death of corporate media. And what can we take away from the decline of corporate media? Well, pop open a champagne bottle. The Washington Post is doing a major shakeup. But in my personal opinion, it is too little, too late. No one respects legacy media anymore. The only reason why Washington Post or the New York Times or ABC or CNN or CBS or BSDNC are even relevant or even have a footnote in today's culture is because they bully their way onto social media with the help of their corporate donors and, of course, Democratic and Republican lawmakers so they can have at least some kind of presence on social media. But here's the great thing about social media. You, the viewer, can decide what you want to see and what you don't want to see. And people, readers, viewers, subscribers decided that their time is more precious than wasting it on reading some sort of neoliberal BS from the Washington Post. It's pure karma. It's pure gold. It's outstanding. It's hilarious. And then it's funny. It's justice for the gray zone because, look, the gray zone and Washington Post are two different things. The gray zone covers the truth. The gray zone has done groundbreaking stories. The gray zone actually checks its sources out, gives out facts and information, and so that you, the viewer, can be informed and also can see those sources as well, as you should, like what a responsible independent media journalist should be. That's what the gray zone is. The gray zone is setting the standard. The Washington Post, at one time, it cared about integrity. Maybe at one time, it actually cared about giving the news. Maybe at one time, it actually cared about its viewers and its audience, but not anymore, especially when you're doing outrage, fake culture warrior kind of stuff. Content that no one cares about, or reading stuff about Trump derangement syndrome, or posting articles in which you don't have proof and evidence. Slandering and smearing the gray zone. And oh, wait, turns out the whole article is BS, Joseph, man. Come on, man. Come on, Jack. Get with the times. The Washington Post is going extinct, so there's only one thing I have to ask you, the audience, and I will give you the final word. You, the people. And there's no such thing as a wrong answer. How are you going to feel when the Washington Post goes belly up and closes its doors for the final time? Will you cry and miss it? Type 1 if you will cry and miss it. A type 2, nah, man, I'm pissing on its grave because it's another neoliberal outlet that needs to go extinct.